What happens when a discovery is so disruptive, so unsettling, that scientists are quietly told to bury it? Or risk everything? In today's investigation, we dive into 10 forbidden discoveries that scientists were warned not to publish, a journey into suppressed research, unexplained anomalies, and the hidden chapters of human knowledge that almost never saw the light of day. Across forgotten laboratories, abandoned archives, and whispered academic circles, there are findings that challenged entire worldviews and were met not with curiosity but with silence. Why were these breakthroughs treated like threats? And more importantly, what were we never meant to know? If you're fascinated by the mysteries behind closed doors, make sure you're here for the full story. This one goes deeper than anything we've covered before. Now, let's begin. Number 10 is the Antarctic organism that shouldn't exist. In the late 1990s, a joint research group drilling deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet made contact with something no one expected: a sealed subglacial ecosystem untouched for millions of years. When they finally breached the chamber and extracted samples, they found a microorganism with a genetic structure unlike anything catalogued on Earth. It wasn't alien, not exactly, but it also didn't fit into any known branch of the biological tree. This organism, later given an informal codename that never appeared in any published journal, could survive temperatures that should have shattered its cellular integrity. Even stranger, it revived after exposures that killed every control organism used in the study. But the anomaly that caused the most internal debate wasn't its resilience. It was its genomic loops, repeating sequences arranged in a pattern that looked designed, or at least engineered, by processes no scientist could identify. Researchers prepared their findings for publication only to receive unexpected instructions: delay, reassess, refrain from drawing conclusions, then quietly stop. The reasoning: officially, it was to prevent public misinterpretation and avoid unnecessary controversy. Unofficially, several team members later hinted that higher authorities feared the headlines such a discovery could trigger stories about synthetic origins, unknown evolutionary lines, or the possibility of entire ecosystems beneath the ice that humans were unprepared to confront. The team was reassigned. Funding was redirected. Some members left research entirely. The organism samples. They were transferred to a facility no one would name, stored under conditions no one could describe. But whispers remained that the microorganism metabolized energy in a way that hinted at Precambrian processes long thought extinct, or that it was part of a much larger system deep under the ice, a system we've only scraped the surface of. Its existence was never officially denied, just quietly ignored. And Antarctica kept its secrets frozen under miles of silence. Number 9 is the ancient map that predicted continents we didn't know existed. In 1929, a museum curator in Istanbul unrolled a fragment of gazelle skin parchment and realized he was holding something impossible. The now famous Piri Reis map was already controversial for depicting Antarctica centuries before its official discovery. But what most people don't know is that a second, lesser-known fragment was discovered decades later, one that never made its way into public archives. This hidden fragment didn't just outline coastlines. It illustrated continental masses with near-perfect accuracy, including 2 large landforms beneath the South Pacific that modern sonar only revealed in the last few years. Even stranger, the mountains and river systems drawn on the parchment matched subglacial topography discovered by modern radar terrain that hasn't been visible above sea level for tens of thousands of years. Experts were stunned. How could a 16th century cartographer depict landscapes buried long before the rise of human civilization? Where did he get his source material? And what were the implications if ancient explorers had mapped the world using information far older than recorded history? Several historians attempted to publish analyses of the newly uncovered fragment, but each effort hit the same wall: inconsistencies, missing provenance, unverifiable origins. At least that was the official line. Behind closed doors, the tone was very different. Archivists mentioned quiet visits by officials who asked pointed questions about where the fragment was stored and who had access. Researchers were advised not to sensationalize the find. One scholar received a formal warning that continued pursuit of the topic could jeopardize professional standing. The fragment was swiftly restricted, moved into a temperature-controlled vault, and according to several insiders, recategorized under a classification level normally reserved for geopolitical documents, not ancient maps. What fueled the secrecy wasn't just what the fragment showed, but what it suggested: that human history might include periods of navigation, exploration, and global mapping far more advanced than we ever imagined. That knowledge may have risen and fallen long before the civilizations we study in textbooks, and that the Piri Reis map might be just one surviving leaf from a library of ancient knowledge we've barely begun to understand. Number 8 is the particle that broke the Standard Model. In 2011, at a quiet midweek symposium tucked inside a European Physics Institute, a small research team presented preliminary data on a subatomic anomaly they had detected during high-energy collision tests. At first glance, it looked like noise, the kind of statistical blip that researchers dismissed after a few weeks of analysis. But this blip returned again and again, following no known decay pattern, no predictable half-life, and no interaction profile recognized by the Standard Model. They called it Delta 6, an unofficial nickname whispered in the lab long before anyone dared to include it in a draft paper. Delta 6 appeared briefly, so briefly that its existence seemed like a glitch in reality. And yet each time it manifested, it released an energy signature that didn't match any theoretical predictions. It wasn't just outside the Standard Model, it behaved as if it followed an entirely separate set of physical rules. Attempts to publish the findings met immediate resistance. Peer reviewers flagged the data as inconclusive and methodologically flawed, even though the team's methods had been cleared in earlier experiments. Several members of the team began to suspect the pushback wasn't scientific, it was political. Because if Delta 6 existed, it carried profound implications. It hinted at the possibility of a hidden layer of physics, not dark matter, not dark energy, but something else entirely. Something that might bridge quantum mechanics and cosmology or expose gaps in our understanding of the universe's earliest moments. Behind closed doors, the team received a quiet visit from representatives tied loosely to a European regulatory body. Their message was polite but unmistakable. Publishing premature claims could damage institutional credibility and destabilize public understanding of physics. Translation: don't publish. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Shortly after, funding for the team's collision program was temporarily paused. Access to their original datasets was restricted, and the lead researcher, once considered a rising star, abruptly shifted fields and stopped discussing particle physics altogether. Yet fragments of the original data continue to circulate privately among physicists. And every few years, an anonymous preprint appears online claiming to have detected a similar anomaly, always withdrawn, always dismissed as an error. Delta 6 may or may not exist, but the intensity of the backlash suggests one thing. If it does, it challenges the very foundations of modern physics in ways we're not prepared to face. Number 7 is the archaeological layer that shouldn't be there. In 2003, a multinational excavation team working in the highlands of northern India uncovered what they initially believed was just another sediment layer, a compressed band of earth sandwiched between two well-dated geological periods. But when they ran their first tests, the results sent shockwaves through the camp. The layer's composition didn't match anything from its supposed era. In fact, it contained manufactured compounds, fused silicates, and metallic residues that should have been impossible at that depth. Carbon dating suggested the layer was over 20,000 years old, long before the rise of known civilizations. Yet embedded within it were artifacts that looked unmistakably worked by human hands. A shard of an alloy that didn't fit any ancient metallurgical timeline, fragments of a tool, shaped with a precision associated with much later technologies, and crystalline patterns that resembled heat signatures, only recreated today in high-temperature industrial processes. The team planned to publish immediately, but within weeks their grant agency contacted them with unusual urgency. Questions were raised about contamination, even though the team had triple verified their sample integrity. Emails circulated advising them to halt analysis until special advisors reviewed the findings. Those advisors arrived quietly, inspected the site, and left without explanation. Shortly after, the excavation was shut down under the pretext of structural instability, despite no geological risk being recorded in the previous surveys. One of the junior researchers, who later left academia, claimed that the shutdown had nothing to do with safety. She said the advisory group feared the findings would ignite debates about the possibility of a lost technological culture predating recorded history. Not because the idea was inherently fringe, but because the evidence was too clean, too inconvenient, too credible to dismiss. The artifacts were confiscated for further evaluation, and the layer was reclassified in official documents as anomalous mixed sediment. But several team members kept private notes. They described microstructural analyses showing machining marks inconsistent with Stone Age tools and heat distortions indicating temperatures exceeding 1,600 degrees conditions impossible for the era by all established timelines. To this day, the official explanation is simple contamination. Yet the researchers involved privately insist the samples were untouched, that the evidence was real, and that somewhere in that forbidden layer, a forgotten chapter of human technology was waiting to be acknowledged. Number 6 is the mathematical proof that terrified its own creators. In the mid-2010s, a small team of theoretical mathematicians working at a major European university developed what they believed was a groundbreaking proof, a unifying framework that linked multiple branches of mathematics under a single elegant structure. At first, it seemed like a beautiful abstraction, the kind that earns quiet applause at conferences and maybe a footnote in future textbooks. But as they pushed deeper, they uncovered something else entirely. Their framework began generating predictions, not approximations, but exact outcomes for physical systems that should have been impossible for a purely mathematical model to anticipate. Quantum behavior, gravitational anomalies, even the structural evolution of certain chaotic systems. Their equations didn't just describe reality, they anticipated it. The team joked that they had accidentally built a mathematical oracle. Then, the predictions kept coming true. One physicist collaborator privately admitted the equations hinted at a hidden determinism underlying quantum randomness, a foundational rewrite of the uncertainty principle itself. Another researcher, after running simulations late at night, refused to continue claiming the framework could in theory forecast events at a scale that violated every ethical standard in predictive modeling. The team prepared a paper, but something was off. Their external reviewers didn't challenge the math. Instead, they expressed institutional concerns about releasing a framework that could be misapplied for geopolitical or private sector advantage. Suddenly, administrators began attending their meetings. Funding bodies requested copies of their preliminary drafts. Security protocols were upgraded around their lab without explanation. Then came the warning. A representative from a National Scientific Advisory Board asked them to withdraw the paper voluntarily, citing potential national security implications. Several team members later reported that the tone wasn't threatening, but it was unmistakably final. They were being told this proof could never be published. Within months, the group dissolved. One member left academia entirely. Another shifted to a different field and refused to discuss the project again. Their notes were sealed, their preprint vanished, and the university listed the research as incomplete. But whispers persist among theoretical circles. Some say the equations offered a glimpse of a deeper architecture beneath physical reality, a structure humans were not meant to manipulate. Others say the proof still exists, stored under layers of clearance held not because it was wrong, but because it was too right. Number 5 is the human DNA sequence that doesn't belong. In the early 2000s, as the Human Genome Project neared completion, researchers expected a neat catalogue of nucleotides, a biological instruction manual with chapters that made evolutionary sense. Instead, they found something that sparked quiet panic within several labs. A recurring sequence of DNA that matched no known evolutionary pathway, no primate ancestor, and no genetic drift model. It wasn't junk DNA. It wasn't viral insertion. And it didn't behave like any known mutation pattern. It appeared intentional, or at least governed by rules that scientists couldn't trace to natural selection. The sequence, nicknamed Locus X, was tiny, subtle, buried deep within non-coding regions. Yet it performed a regulatory function that influenced multiple genes linked to cognition, neural development, and abstract reasoning. In other words, this mysterious sequence affected the very traits that made humans human. Several independent teams attempted to publish early papers analyzing Locus X, but reviewers repeatedly returned them with vague warnings about premature conclusions and insufficient evolutionary context. One researcher later claimed in a closed workshop that the objections were political, not scientific, because acknowledging Locus X required confronting a possibility no one wanted to touch publicly. That a key part of human uniqueness did not arise from known evolutionary mechanisms. Behind the scenes, a quiet directive circulated among major genetic institutes. Teams studying Locus X were told to classify their work as exploratory and avoid any terminology hinting at artificial selection, external influence, or anomalous inheritance. Then things got stranger. A small group of researchers discovered that Locus X had a near-perfect analogue in an extinct hominin species, but with a mutation rate so low it defied every expected model. Another lab found that Locus X sequences from individuals around the world were identical, showing none of the geographic divergence typical of ancient DNA. In simple terms, whatever Locus X was, it appeared everywhere. And it appeared suddenly. The research was never officially suppressed, it was simply discouraged. Funding dried up. Projects were folded into larger genomic initiatives where the data quietly disappeared into institutional archives. Today, Locus X is almost never mentioned outside niche genetic conferences. But those who studied it insist the mystery remains unresolved. A coordinated genetic signature with no evolutionary explanation influencing the most advanced aspects of human cognition. A sequence we inherited from nowhere, and no one will say why. Number 4 is the cosmic signal that answered a question we never asked. In 2014, a remote deep space array positioned in the deserts of Western Australia registered a burst of radio frequencies unlike any previously recorded. At first, astronomers assumed it was another fast radio burst, one of those millisecond flashes that appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. But this one was different. It wasn't a burst. It was a pattern. Not repeating, not looping, not coded in any recognizable language, but structured, purposeful, mathematically impossible to form by random astrophysical processes. The anomaly lasted 16 minutes, shifting through frequency ranges too precise to be natural and too deliberate to be accidental. Algorithms analyzing the event flagged it with a probability of less than 1 in a trillion of being background noise. But the most unsettling part came hours later. Another array on the other side of the planet detected an identical pattern as though the signal was targeting Earth itself. Researchers drafted a preliminary report, but before it could be shared publicly, an international oversight body stepped in. The team received a formal request to reclassify their data under a restricted access protocol, typically reserved for high-risk security threats. The reason given was to avoid mass misinterpretation and premature conclusions. Unofficially, team members told a different story. According to 2 astronomers later interviewed anonymously, the pattern contained harmonic intervals that directly mapped onto prime number sequences, a hallmark many SETI researchers had long theorized would indicate artificial origin. Then came the chilling detail. The signal wasn't just mathematically structured, it was reactive. During internal testing, researchers ran simulated pulses back into the model using slightly modified parameters. The recorded pattern from the sky had shifted at its tail end within milliseconds of their initial detection, as if responding to the observational process itself. Several team members panicked, warning that if the signal was truly reactive, sending a response could be catastrophic. Others argued that Earth had already answered simply by observing it. Within days, all public logs of the detection vanished. Press releases were rewritten describing the event as a calibration glitch. Funding for the array was restructured, and the lead scientist quietly transferred to a different project. But fragments of the recording still circulate in encrypted academic channels. And those who have analyzed it insist the truth is far stranger than extraterrestrial contact. It was as if the universe itself whispered something, and then waited to see if we'd whisper back. Number 3 is the medical case study that rewrote the limits of human consciousness. In 1997, a neurologist at a major US research hospital encountered a patient whose brain scan contradicted everything medical science assumed about human cognition. The patient, identified only as case A117, arrived after a minor accident. He was conscious, articulate, and fully functional. Yet his MRI revealed something impossible. Over 60% of his cortical tissue was missing. Not damaged, not compressed, simply absent. This wasn't the famous hydrocephalus case found in textbooks, nor was it a miscalibrated machine. 3 independent scans confirmed the same anomaly, a functional human being with a brain structure incompatible with known neurological models. Researchers rushed to study A117, but within weeks the project took a bizarre turn. The patient performed extraordinarily well on cognitive evaluations, showing advanced pattern recognition, accelerated learning speed, and an uncanny ability to predict phrases before they were spoken, as if he were anticipating conversations a split second early. The team scrambled to prepare a groundbreaking paper, but administrative pressure began mounting. Peer reviewers refused to sign off not because the data was flawed, but because the implications were philosophically destabilizing. One reviewer even warned privately that the study could ignite a resurgence of pseudoscientific interpretations of consciousness. Then came the event that ended the research entirely. During a controlled observation session, A117 began describing memories that did not belong to him. Memories from people he had never met, yet filled with verifiable details. He recited lines from books he had never read, described historical events with extraordinary precision, and even referenced medical terms he had no way of knowing. One neurologist proposed a radical hypothesis that A117's brain was operating like a receiver, tapping into a distributed field of consciousness rather than generating experience through neural architecture alone. That idea alone was enough to kill the project. Shortly afterward, the hospital placed the entire case under classification. All research was transferred to a private biomedical contract group. The patient was moved, his whereabouts unknown. The team was instructed not to discuss the case further for the protection of public health literacy. But whispers remain. A few researchers claim the case notes suggested that consciousness might not be local to the brain, that the brain could be an interface, not an origin. And if that were true, the implications for identity memory and humanity itself would rewrite entire fields. A1 didn't just challenge neuroscience, he threatened the fundamental model of what the human mind is. Number 2 is the ancient device that turned out not to be ancient at all. In 2018, archaeologists excavating a remote burial site in the Caucasus Mountains uncovered what they first believed was a ceremonial relic, a palm-sized disc made of an alloy resembling bronze, but with an unusual, almost magnetic sheen. The carvings on its surface didn't match any known alphabet. Some symbols resembled constellations. Others looked like geometric sequences arranged with unnerving precision. At first, the team assumed it was a ritual object. That theory lasted exactly 3 days. During routine cataloguing, one of the researchers set the artifact near an instrument tray and every monitor in the tent flickered. Devices malfunctioned. A compass spun wildly. The ancient disc emitted a faint hum that equipment picked up as a low-frequency oscillation, something no Bronze Age artifact should be capable of producing. Alarmed, the team ran metallurgical tests. The results broke their timeline completely. The isotopic ratios suggested the alloy was less than 200 years old, perhaps even newer. Yet it had been found sealed beneath undisturbed strata dating back nearly 4,000 years. That was the moment everything changed. Historians argued the dating was wrong. Physicists argued the readings were wrong. Administrators argued the entire site must have been contaminated. But none of that explained what happened next. While cataloguing the carvings, a graduate researcher noticed they weren't symbols, they were coordinates. Coordinates that pointed not to a location on Earth, but to a point in low Earth orbit. The team froze. Was this an elaborate hoax? A modern object somehow buried in an untouched ancient grave? Or something far more disturbing, a device that did not belong to the era in which it was found? Before the team could investigate further, officials arrived. Not local officials, international ones representing agencies the archaeologists didn't even recognize. They seized the artifact, the soil samples, every digital file, even the personal notes of the team members. The twist came months later when a satellite operator in Kazakhstan anonymously leaked telemetry logs. During the week of the artifact's discovery, an unidentified object, small metallic disc-shaped, was tracked entering the atmosphere over the exact excavation site. It never reappeared on radar. And the artifact they found on the ground, its orbital coordinates matched the object's last known position. It wasn't ancient. It wasn't misplaced. It had fallen from the sky and landed thousands of years before it was ever created. Number 1 is the experiment that proved reality can be switched off. In 2021, a breakthrough in quantum optics led a small research team in Japan to attempt something bold, a modified version of the delayed choice quantum eraser. On paper, it was just another refinement to an established experiment, a clever way to test how photons behave when observed versus unobserved. But what they found wasn't a refinement. It was a rupture. During one late-night trial, the team altered the timing between detection and erasure, just slightly introducing a micro-delay no one had tested before. When they ran the dataset, they stared in silence. The interference pattern, the quantum fingerprint of wave-like behavior, didn't just collapse. It vanished. Entire sections of the probability distribution were missing, as if the photons had chosen not to exist under those conditions. Thinking it was instrumentation failure, they ran the trial again and again. Every time the same result. Under the micro-delay, the photons behaved as though reality itself was optional, a state that could be on or off, depending entirely on whether the universe expected to be observed. The team spent weeks trying to falsify their own findings. They replaced detectors, rewired arrays, rebuilt their timing modules from scratch. Nothing changed. The anomaly remained. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't noise. It was a clue. A terrifying one. One physicist described it off the record as discovering that existence has a standby mode. Another argued the data hinted at a deeper substrate beneath space-time, a kind of pre-physical layer that switches states depending on observational demand, almost like a cosmic optimization system. Before they could publish, representatives from a national research ministry arrived unannounced. They asked precise questions, took copies of the raw data, and quietly instructed the team to discontinue all micro-delay trials until a full risk assessment could be completed. When the lead scientist pushed back asking what risk a quantum optics experiment could possibly pose, the reply was chillingly simple. If your findings are correct, the risk is existential. Within a month, the lab was reassigned to unrelated research. Their funding was redirected. The preprint they had submitted to an academic server disappeared within hours of posting. Those who saw the data insist the implication was clear. Reality doesn't behave like a continuous, immutable field. It behaves like a system, one capable of withholding information, conserving complexity, and shutting down branches of possibility when they are not being watched. For the first time, a team had gathered evidence not just about how the universe works, but about how it chooses to work. The deeper we look into these forbidden discoveries, the more one unsettling truth becomes impossible to ignore. The world we see is only a fraction of the world that exists. From suppressed research to buried artifacts, from impossible signals to mysteries, written into our very DNA, each revelation hints at forces shaping our reality far beyond our understanding and far beyond our control. But perhaps the most haunting part isn't what has been hidden. It's what still waits in the dark, undiscovered, unexamined, or quietly erased before anyone can ask the right questions. If you want to see where this journey leads next, stay curious and stay with me. The next story is already taking shape in the shadows, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed today's story, make sure to like and subscribe. It truly helps me create more content for you.